When it comes to monster taming RPGs on the PlayStation, you'll no doubt instantly be drawn to the likes of Digimon World or Monster Rancher, but a far more obscure choice known as Dragon Seeds was just as good, but sadly never managed to hit the ground running. It sees you taking up the role of what the game calls a Dragon Sage, where you've got to clone dragons from DNA, train them up and fight your way through the ranks. In terms of story, there's not really too much to it, and it only focuses on you having to chase down a rival who defeats you at the beginning of the game. But for what it lacks in narrative, it more than makes up for it with the gameplay. It manages to separate itself from the likes of Pokemon, and it doesn't see you wandering through the world and encountering monsters, and instead fully focusing on the breeding and battle aspects of the game. Training your dragon is a major part of the experience, and how you treat them is vital to how they perform. You've got to put them through their paces, with various drills to boost their stats, as well as manage their overall mood. But if you push them too hard, they'll die, and if you treat them poorly, they're more than likely to turn against you in a fight. Speaking of the battles, they all take place on a linear grid with 3 different placements. You've got close, mid and far, with you and your opponent constantly fighting back and forth on the line. Depending on where you stand determines what your dragon will be able to do, and being close allows you to make use of a weapon that each dragon can hold, whereas mid and far see you being able to use magic from a distance. It's basically all about baiting your opponent, and this sort of rock paper scissors approach provides plenty of strategy. Is it perfect though? Absolutely not, but the ideas it deploys makes it something that all monster breeding fans should give a go. When you think of PlayStation RPGs, your mind will no doubt immediately go to the heavy hitters like Final Fantasy VII, Suikoden and maybe Chrono Cross. But what about the game that started it all? Released in '96, Beyond the Beyond was the very first traditional JRPG released for the PlayStation in North America, and was developed by Camelot, the same guys behind the beloved Golden Sun series, and this game is the literal definition of a forgotten PS1 hidden gem. The story follows Finn, a young boy living in the peaceful village of Isla, but it's not long before he's pulled into a conflict which sees an empire sweeping the land and conquering surrounding kingdoms and looking to revive an ancient evil that Finn has to stop by locating and recruiting allies to his cause. Now the gameplay is where Beyond the Beyond excels, with the real standout feature here being the active playing system. Long before games like Paper Mario or Camelot's own Golden Sun popularized interactive turn-based combat, Beyond the Beyond was here, and by hitting the X button at the exact right moment during an attack, you could land a critical double strike, time it perfectly on defense, and your character would block, significantly reducing the incoming amount of damage. But for just how enjoyable the battle system is, a common critique of the game is just how frequently you'll be getting to use it, and the encounter rate is extremely high, which may have the potential to turn some players away. One area though where Beyond the Beyond comes into its own is with its visuals, and it straddles the line between the 16-bit Super Nintendo era and the 32-bit revolution, featuring charming 2D character sprites exploring simple 3D environments. It ends up being a nice blend of the old and the new, so if you're fond of old school RPGs and don't mind the frequent encounter rate, then Beyond the Beyond is definitely worth picking up. When it comes to SRPGs on the PlayStation, the usual suspects like Final Fantasy Tactics and Vandal Hearts are no doubt the go-to options, but in 2001, as the PS2 was already taken over, Koei quietly released a localized gem that many missed known as Sayuki Journey West. It sees you playing as Sanzo, a monk who's sent to travel from China to India, but the goal isn't to stop a villain or some great evil, but a pilgrimage that sees you picking up followers along the way. That gives the experience a distinct sense of progression that's often lacking in similar types of games. When it comes to the gameplay, it'll feel familiar to the many other isometric RPGs on the system, but with 2 key differences. This is mainly with the battle system that sees every character except Sanzo being able to transform into massive, powerful different forms. These forms grant a huge HP boost, as well as devastating special attacks, but they operate on a limited gauge, so balancing when to unleash your inner beast is the key to surviving some of the game's tougher fights. Expanding further on this system is the elemental aspect of the battle system, where there's 5 different elements in play. You've got fire, water, wood, gold and earth, and it ends up being far deeper than the standard fire beats ice mechanic, forcing you to position your units based on the terrain's elemental affinity and the enemy's weaknesses that truly increase the amount of strategy involved in each fight. Unlike the grim, dark political intrigue of Final Fantasy Tactics, Sayuki is a vibrant, character-driven adventure, and the chemistry between the party members really makes the journey feel personal, turning a standard tactical grid-based RPG into a heartwarming road trip through Asia. Dragon Valor introduces players to Clovis, a young man who's just returned to his village to find it burning down, and it's not long after this event that Clovis runs into a legendary warrior known as Dragon Valor, who has the ability to wield magical swords and slay dragons. As you would have guessed by now, a dragon was responsible for the destruction of his village, so he takes the warrior's sword and vows to get his revenge. The best thing about Dragon Valor is how it seamlessly blends a mixture of genres to create something quite unique, and the best way to describe it would be putting Streets of Rage, Luna, Crash Bandicoot and Zelda into a blender, and this would be the result, with the adventure taking place across an overworld map that holds many locations and surprises to uncover. Now the meat of the game takes place from a side-scrolling view and presents a wide range of enemies for the player to take out. The further you progress, the harder the challenge you'll face, but luckily there's an array of items that make the process all the more manageable. It not only provides you with a big sword and plenty of attacks, but also an RPG style inventory where you can manage your magic and items that you've acquired. From strength to magic and defense, there's plenty of stats that offer up a noticeable difference out on the field, but in order to level them up, you don't gain experience points, but instead acquire power-ups that serve to bolster your character's skill. Even new magic abilities are learned through fighting the game's many different bosses, and offer the most friction when it comes to progressing. They're all intricately designed, both visually and mechanically, requiring a real understanding of all the parts in play to overcome. So if you're on the lookout for something new to jump into on the PlayStation and have never heard of it, Dragon's Valor would make a solid choice. At the time, monster collecting RPGs was surging in popularity, with the likes of Pokemon making a huge splash, but the PlayStation wasn't without its fair share of similar games that were just as enjoyable. One of them that seemingly flew under the radar for many was Jade Cocoon, which saw you taking up the fight as a young man known as Levant, a young cocoon master whose village is plunged into a deep sleep by a mysterious curse. In order to turn it around, you've got to venture into the lush but dangerous forest, which is home to creatures known as minions that end up playing a huge role in the game. These minions are essentially the monsters you'll be collecting throughout the adventure and using in battle. But whereas in Pokemon you've got to solely rely on them, Levant is able to jump into the fight himself with an array of different abilities, as well as each of the monsters having their own pros and cons during each fight. For as good as the combat is though, where the game truly opens up is when you head back to the village and get to talk to someone known as the Naji Maiden. This character gives you the option of fusing any of your monsters together to create a hybrid that inherits the physical traits as well as stats and elemental affinities of their parents. This aspect of the game felt way ahead of its time, and due to the sheer amount of monsters, there's nigh on endless possibilities when it comes to creating the perfect team of minions to take with you on your journey. One major thing that stands out about Jade Cocoon though is its presentation. The character design, world building and beautifully pre-rendered backgrounds come together to create an almost infectious atmosphere that the game can well and truly call its own. So for any monster collecting fans out there, Jade Cocoon is an absolute must play. What if I told you there was a game on the PlayStation that combined a full-scale 3D fighting game with a deep life sim RPG? A game where you don't just level up stats, but you actually watch your character age from a child to a grandmaster. Well, that's what Shaolin is about, where the story is actually a sprawling, non-linear journey across ancient China, where your choices dictate your outcome. Unlike most RPGs of the era, Shaolin uses a dynamic NPC system, where you're free to interact with many of the different characters and challenge them to fights. And whereas in most RPGs, leveling up is just a number getting bigger, here in Shaolin, leveling up is a story told through your character's body. As I mentioned, you start out as a child looking for a master, and by the final act, you are the master, looking at a world that has aged alongside you. It's a really unique take on the usual formula, and as you age and grow, you'll slowly begin to learn new moves and new strategies to deal with the multitude of different fights. When you encounter an enemy, the game shifts seamlessly into a one-on-one or even one versus many 3D fighter, and it ends up feeling like a precursor to the Yakuza series and even Tekken's Force mode, but with a much heavier focus on authentic martial arts that only grows as the game progresses. Throughout the adventure, you'll come to realize that food is also a huge aspect of the experience, and by checking out the local restaurants, you'll be able to recover your vitality and endurance that's lost during combat. But your actions with those who you come across will determine if you are seen as a virtuous hero or a rogue fighter that changes how NPCs interact with you, and which of the game's multiple endings you'll receive. So if you're a fan of fighters as well as RPGs, Shaolin ends up being a great mix of the two. The PlayStation was no stranger to adaptations of many different manga series, and although they weren't always the best in terms of quality, now and again one would thoroughly impress and live up to the lofty expectations of its source material. One game that hit all the right marks was Gundam Martian Memory, which is based on Battle Angel Alita and came in the form of an action RPG. After being found disembodied by a scientist who puts her back together, you control Alita as you explore each area and try to unlock your lost memories in a world where bounty hunting is the main way to prove yourself and earn money. Thankfully, Banpresto created a pretty efficient fighting engine for all of the action to play out in, where you're free to take advantage of the various skills your berserker body grants you. There's only 3 buttons you've got to worry about as well, 2 offering different types of attack and the 3rd allowing you to block. But by holding down R1, it's possible to pull off more powerful versions of your attacks, and as you progress throughout the game and unlock new upgrades for your body, you'll gain access to powerful super combos that can really devastate your opponent in a flash. You've also got a wealth of defensive maneuvers as well, such as rolling and backflipping out of harm's way and being able to counter incoming attacks by blocking at the right moment. That being said though, combat is entirely optional and it's possible to simply slip by the enemy without having to engage at all, with you having to press the select button in order to enter each fight when close. Of course, it wouldn't be Battle Angel Alita without Motorball, and it's great to see that it's also included in the game, which ends up being a sort of mashup of racing and combat at the same time that offers a welcome break from the exploring and fighting within the world. Ultimately, Martian Memory is one hell of a game, and for any fan of the series, you owe it to yourself to check it out. Releasing towards the end of the PlayStation's life, it's easy to see why Rhapsody never really got much fanfare, and ultimately would go on to become a hidden gem rather than a well-known classic. Instead of your standard generic RPG, what makes this something truly special is how it throws out the entire playbook and instead delivers a story that combines what can only be described as an anime-inspired Broadway musical. This focus on music lies at the center of everything you'll be doing in the game, which follows a young girl known as Cornette as she sets out on a journey to undo a curse that's been set upon a prince by a spiteful and jealous witch. What makes her unique is her ability to commune with puppets through the use of her trumpet, and along for the ride is Kururu, Cornette's best friend, who just so happens to be a puppet herself, and ends up being pretty useful throughout the game, and especially during battle. The combat system is where Rhapsody truly comes alive, and it all plays out in a turn-based manner, with each of the fights taking place on a small grid. What makes it a bit different though is that instead of recruiting party members along the way, you get to use a variety of different puppets, which all come along with their own elemental affinities and weaknesses. By playing your trumpet, you'll slowly build up a meter, and once it's full, you're free to unleash one of your many different deadly attacks. Much like the playful nature of not only the visuals but the tone of the story, the overall difficulty of the game is extremely low, making it quite an easy RPG to play through, as well as something perfect for younger players to experience. Overall, it's nowhere near one of the most intricate or for that matter memorable RPGs that the PlayStation received, but it's definitely worth giving it a look if you're into the genre. Thousand Arms has to be one of the most innovative RPGs on the PlayStation, mainly due to the interesting ways the game is set up and how the systems it presents play into each other. The story throws you into the role of a spirit blacksmith known as Maze, who's a descendant of an extremely important family. He and his companions are revolting against an empire who are out searching for 5 holy flames. With this power, they'll have the means to rule the world, and this is where Maze comes in to stop them dead in their tracks. As with many RPGs, the adventure is broken up into several areas all connected by a world map, and you'll find yourself visiting towns and villages to forests and mountain trails as the journey unfolds. Now, just as important as the story and world is the gameplay itself, which really comes into its own during battle. It's all turn-based in nature and sees you carrying out a vast array of moves and abilities, with the most prominent being elemental beasts. These can be summoned after reaching certain conditions and provide much of the visual flair during each encounter, but the most unique aspect of the game is the dating mechanic that allows you to date several of the female NPCs, and by going on dates and interacting with them, you get the opportunity to raise your intimacy level with them, and depending on your actions during your time together, their mood will affect the outcome. And all of this plays nicely into weapon and spell forging, which is intricately tied to your level of intimacy with any given character, and offers a really engaging way to enhance your abilities without having to solely rely on battle. When it comes down to it, the PlayStation was a literal powerhouse when it came to RPGs, and although Thousand controls and arms couldn't be described as the best, it's definitely one that does enough things differently to be able to stand on its own. So if you can find it for a good price, or is simply just looking for something new to emulate, it's definitely worth a try. Square were one of the PlayStation's biggest supporters, with masterpiece after masterpiece like Parasite Eve and Xenogears, but right in the middle they'd create a game so strange that they didn't even bother releasing it in the West. It was a full-blown stat-building JRPG where instead of swinging swords or casting spells, it saw you drift in cars through the neon-soaked streets of Japan. You take on the role of Sho Akasaki, who's the newest member of one of the many different racing gangs throughout the game, and in true RPG fashion, Sho has got a massive case of amnesia and doesn't remember who he is or where he actually came from. Now the story revolves around a sort of mythical event known as the Fastest Legend, which was a race that took place a few years prior to the events of the game, and as you progress you slowly begin to realise that you're directly tied to this legendary race. For as good as the story ends up being though, what really makes Racing Lagoon one of the PlayStation's best hidden gems is the gameplay. As with many RPGs, exploring is a huge part of the experience, and here in Racing Lagoon it's also present, with you getting to freely explore the city streets at night, and when a rival racer spots you, they'll flash their lights and you'll enter into a one-on-one race. The way the RPG elements work are a bit different as well, as you don't really obtain any type of experience points, and instead the way you grow is being able to rip off a part of each and every driver's car that you successfully defeat. This leads to the customization in Racing Lagoon, which is extremely deep and becomes one of the more intricate and satisfying aspects of the game. It lets you build all sorts of different cars from the ground up, and you'll find yourself constantly tweaking your stats, upgrading your gear and managing small details like the distribution of weight on your car, exactly like managing a party in a traditional JRPG. So if you're a fan of racers and also have a fondness of RPGs, then Racing Lagoon ends up being the perfect mix of the two. Well, that does it for another video. Keep an eye out for the next one, which will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Road Rage, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.